All right, so we're diving into Casino Royale today, the 2006 one. Got our Wikipedia handy, and we're also going off of Dutch Bond fans recap on YouTube, so should be a fun one.
Yeah, always a good time to revisit a Bond film, especially this one. I think Casino Royale did a really interesting thing where it kind of felt like a reboot,
Mm-hmm.
but it still felt very true to like the core of what Bond is all about.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the magic of it, right? Like they hit the reset button, but they didn't lose the essence of Bond in the process.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, though, if it was kind of a response to Die Another Day. I mean, those CGI effects with the invisible car and, what was it, the tsunami?
Oh, yeah,
They were pretty out there, even for Bond.
totally. Die Another Day definitely went a little over the top of the action and maybe lost some of that grounded espionage feel that the early Bond films had.
Yeah, for sure. And I wonder, too, did the success of the Bourne films around that time with their, emphasis on realism, did that play a role?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that definitely had an impact. Audiences were really into those gritty, more believable action sequences.
Yeah, it's like they were craving something a bit more grounded.
And I think getting the rights to Casino Royale, Ian Fleming's first Bond novel, was a huge part of that. It allowed them to go back to the source material and show a Bond that's, a bit rougher around the edges, more like Fleming originally imagined him.
Yeah, less polished. Definitely more ruthless. I mean, even the casting of Daniel Craig was a huge departure from what people expected.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, he didn't fit that, like, classic Bond mold at all, right? And there was so much backlash.
So much backlash. Websites like DanielCraigIsNotBond.com. I mean, people were not happy.
Right. They were calling him James Bland in the newspapers. But you know what? Looking back, I think that rawness, that kind of edge he brought was what made him so compelling.
I totally agree.
And it's right there from the start with the title song, You Know My Name, which is so different from like the typical Bond theme.
Yeah, it's got this really haunting, almost melancholic feel to it.
Right. And the lyrics too, like, I've got a job to do, you won't see me bleed. It's like foreshadowing the kind of cold, emotionally detached agent he becomes.
Absolutely. The music in this film is just brilliant. It really sets the tone for Bond's whole emotional journey.
It's so interesting, too, that they even dropped the classic gun barrel opening sequence, the one that's like a staple of every Bond film.
It was a bold move for
Or
sure.
like Bond forgetting his Walther PPK.
Right. I think it was a way of signaling that this was a new kind of Bond story, one that's focused on his origins, on his flaws, his vulnerabilities.
Totally, and we see that right away. This is Bond early in his career, still earning his Nero status.
Yeah, he's making mistakes, he's impulsive, he even loses his cool at the poker table a few times.
Right, like it's a side of Bond we don't always get to see, and it makes him, I think, a lot more relatable.
Definitely. We see him struggle, we see him bleed, literally and figuratively. It makes his eventual transformation into that, unflappable 007 all the more powerful.
And speaking of impactful, those action sequences are just something else. Like that crane sequence in Madagascar, the foot chase through the construction site, they're so raw and intense. You really feel every punch, every near miss.
I think the decision to use practical stunts over CGI really added to that gritty realism.
Oh, absolutely. You're right there in the middle of the action with Bond.
Totally. And then there's the update to the casino scene itself. No more Baccarat. It's all Texas Hold'em.
Yeah. Do you think that was a good change?
I think it was a smart move. Texas Hold'em was huge at the time, and it gave those casino scenes a more modern feel. But I also think it works on a deeper level because the poker game becomes this kind of metaphor for Bond's internal struggles.
Yeah, it's like he's playing two hands at once, the one on the table and the one going on inside his head.
Exactly.
And you see that when he loses that hand to Le Chiffre because of his tell, and Vesper picks up on it immediately.
Right. He's bleeding emotionally, she tells him.
It's a great line, and it shows right away that Vesper Lind is not your typical Bond girl.
Oh, not at all. Vesper is something else. She's smart, witty, and she sees right through Bond's facade.
Yeah, and their dynamic is electric. There's that, sexual tension, but also this intellectual sparring that's really engaging.
Totally. And I think that's what makes her betrayal later on all the more devastating.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We'll get into that later on in the deep dive, but for now, let's take a quick break. I think it's interesting how those poker matches become almost like these psychological battlefields, right?
So yeah, for sure.
It's not just Bond versus Le Chiffre. It's Bond versus, like, his own inner demons.
Exactly. You see his brilliance, but you also see that recklessness that's always kind of simmering beneath the surface. Those high-stakes games really put his psychological state front and center.
Yeah, it's like he's playing two hands at once, the one on the table and then the one going on inside his head.
Yeah.
Every bluff reveals something about how he operates.
Totally. And remember that moment where he loses that crucial hand because Le Chiffre reads his tell.
Oh.
It's such a great reminder that even the best, even James Bond can get thrown off by his emotions.
And Vesper picks up on it immediately. He's bleeding emotionally, she tells him. I mean, just a brilliant line.
Such a good line. And it shows you right away that Vesper Lynd is not just another Bond girl.
Right. She's not just there to be rescued or, be arm candy.
Exactly. She's an active participant in the mission. She's managing the funds. She's providing strategic insights. And she's constantly challenging Bond's perspective.
I love how intelligent and witty she is. She's more than a match for Bond in the brains department. But there's also this vulnerability about her and like a sense of mystery that just makes her so intriguing.
Oh, absolutely. She's a complex character, no doubt. And her relationship with Bond is really fascinating to unpack. It's full of tension and attraction, but there's also this power dynamic at play that looking back can be a bit uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah, you're thinking about that scene after Bond wins the Aston Martin in the poker game, right?
Mm.
Like it felt like he was almost forcing himself on her, even though she initially pushed him away. It's a reminder, I think, that even though Casino Royale was trying to, modernize the Bond girl, it still carries some of that baggage from the franchise's past.
It's true. It's a tricky balance. Vesper's a strong, capable woman, but she's still ultimately defined by her relationship with Bond. And of course, that relationship takes a dark turn when we discover her betrayal.
Man, that betrayal was such a gut punch. I mean, you knew something was off with Vesper, but to see her working with the enemy, it's like the rug gets pulled out from under you.
The brilliance of Casino Royale is that it sets up these incredibly high emotional stakes. We see Bond fall for Vesper. He becomes vulnerable with her and then experiences this betrayal that just shatters him.
It's heartbreaking to watch him go through that, and the film doesn't shy away from showing the emotional toll it takes on him. Like that scene where he's in the shower after being tortured, just trying to regain his composure. It's haunting.
Yeah, you can see the conflict raging inside him, right? The battle between his duty as an agent and his human need to process pain and grief.
And in the end, duty wins out. That chilling line after Vesper's death, the bitch is dead. It's like a switch flips inside him. He's shutting down emotionally, turning off his feelings to protect himself.
It's tragic, but it's also essential to understanding how Bond becomes that, iconic detached figure we see in later films. He's learned that emotional vulnerability can be a weakness, and he's building walls around his heart.
It's like Vesper's betrayal forges him into the ultimate weapon, cold, calculating, and seemingly impervious to pain. But even then, you still sense that part of him that longs for connection, for trust.
And that's what makes Bond such a compelling character, right? Mm-hmm. He's capable of great love and great violence, and the tension between those two extremes drives his entire arc.
So we've seen Bond's vulnerabilities exposed, his heart broken. He's on the path to becoming this 007, we know, but there's still so much we don't know about the forces that are shaping him. What about Mr. White and the mysterious organization he represents? How do they fit into this whole equation?
It's weird, right? Like Mr. White, he's this ghost-like figure. He pops up, pulls strings, and then vanishes back into the shadows.
He's so different from the Bond villains we're used to.
Right.
No elaborate plan to take over the world, no crazy hidden lair. He's just calm, collected, and totally enigmatic.
And the organization he's part of, we only get these little glimpses, right?
Right.
But it's a huge network, like this web of power and influence that goes way beyond that casino in Montenegro.
It's like they represent this whole other world operating in the shadows.
Right.
And Bond is just starting to understand it.
It's like they're playing this secret game on a global scale. And Bond, even with all his 00 training, is still trying to figure out the rules. It's one of the things that makes Casino Royale so compelling, I think. It's not just a reboot. It's like a whole new take on the espionage genre.
Yeah, totally.
Like we're moving away from those Cold War tropes into this more complex world.
Like the lines are blurred. Right.
Exactly. It's not always clear who the good guys and the bad guys are.
And Bond, he's made mistakes. He's been betrayed. He's learning that trust is a dangerous thing in this world.
And that's a huge part of his transformation, right? He's losing that rookie agent naivete.
Yeah. It's like a loss of innocence almost.
Yeah, exactly. He's seeing the hard truths of the espionage world and realizing that sometimes you got to play dirty to survive.
But even as he's becoming more ruthless, you can still see those little bits of idealism.
Right. Like he still wants to believe in something.
Yeah. And that conflict, I think, is what makes Bond such a fascinating character.
He's capable of incredible good and also, incredible violence. And it's that tension that makes his story so interesting.
And we know that this isn't the last we see of Mr. Whitewright. And his organization, like they're going to keep popping up in Bond's future.
Casino Royale really sets the stage for the whole Craig era of Bond films.
Right.
It's like they planted these seeds that will grow over the next few movies.
It's wild to think they managed to do so much in one film. They rebooted the franchise, they introduced a new Bond, and they created this whole new mythology for the future. I think that's why it's aged so well.
It really has. And I think for anyone listening, watching Casino Royale isn't just about entertainment. It's an invitation to think about the world of espionage, to question what you think you know about power, and to really consider what it costs to become a weapon in the shadows.
Yeah, it's a film that makes you think long after the credits roll. Until next time, folks, keep diving deep, keep questioning, and remember, the world is full of secrets just waiting to be uncovered.